Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Emerald Coast. I'm the Reverend Ruth Van Lillian, the minister here, and we are so pleased to welcome everyone this morning. And if we have any first-time visitors, and it's nice that we have a sanctuary that's of a size and being filled to the point that I'm not sure if we have any first-time visitors. So to say that we welcome you and encourage you to take a look at our website and our Facebook page to learn more about us. This morning we hope to touch hearts, teach minds, challenge spirits, and comfort souls. May you find spiritual refreshment in our service this morning.
I would like to add my good morning to Reverend Ruth. I'm Char Farley, and I'm a member here and your service leader for this morning. We have a few announcements that did not make it into your order of service today, so we'd like to call your attention to the fact that this evening at 6 p.m. our fellowship will host the monthly meeting of PFLAG, which is the support group for LGBTQ plus individuals and their parents and friends. Family, friends, and allies of lesbians and gay men are all invited to attend. That's this evening at 6 p.m. A word from Judy Byrne-Riley to remind you that if you did not have the opportunity last week to register to vote, and you would like to vote, you'll have an opportunity again today. Following the end of the service, there will again be an opportunity to register to vote for the November 8th election. And if you're registered, but you would like to register to vote by mail, you can do that also. That'll be at the rear of our sanctuary. This Tuesday will be the last day that you can register for this November election. And next week, Judy Byrne-Riley will be our guest speaker, and she'll be speaking on voting and godliness. So you don't want to miss that. Please look at your order of service and remember that we have a congregational meeting on October the 30th. It's a very important meeting, particularly for our members, but we welcome visitors as well. It's a very brief meeting. It will be following our service, and it will be an election for our new officers and trustees on our board of trustees. So please make sure that you attend. That's October 30th. That's also Halloween Sunday. And we invite everyone. It's going to be an intergenerational service. We invite everyone, all ages, to come in costume. I have dusted off my witch's hat and have it in my skulls and bones pants, so I'm all set. So I don't want to be the only one here with the children. So remember that. And then afterwards, our youth are going to be trick-or-treating for UNICEF. So it's going to be a really exciting Sunday, October 30th. And of course today, please look at your order of service. If you are visiting today and you're not familiar with our second hour, we invite you to read about that. We have two adult education groups today meeting, Fort Swing and the Buddhistarians. And if you would prefer to sing rather than talk, we invite you to join our UUFEC choir rehearsal that's in the harmony room at the end of the hallway here. Visitors are welcome, and members who aren't members of the choir yet, we urge you to attend. All right, I think that covers our announcements, and now Cecile will lead us into the prelude and the start of our service. And may I ask Julian Albano is going to help us this morning and light the chalice. Julian, come right on up. Our chalice lighting this morning was written by Tom Goldsmith, and it's called Infinite Possibilities of Love. Symbol of light and knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Would you please take your gray hymnals and turn toward the back? Our call to worship is a reading in the back, number 601. 601 in the gray hymnal. I would like to read this responsively, so we'll just alternate the phrases back and forth. When all the people of the world love, the many will not oppress the few. The honored will not disdain the humble. And now would you find your teal hymnals? Our opening hymn is When Our Heart is in a Holy Place, 1008 in the teal hymnal. We'll sing all verses. As you are able, I invite you to stand.
Grace.
somebody tell me what an enemy is? Anybody have any enemies? Yes, Julian, what's an enemy? Yeah, they're not friends with you. Sure, were you going to say something else? Add in to?
I was just gonna say that nobody should have any enemies.
Well, that would be a wonderful thing, wouldn't it? If nobody had any enemies. Well, that's a good beginning for this story, because we're going to listen to the story and figure out how to get rid of our enemies. What we can do. Okay, well, just a minute, sure. Let's see if your idea corresponds with this young queen's idea. I seem to be having a microphone problem today. There we go. Everybody hear me all right? I'm pretty loud-mouthed, so. Okay. All right. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who was queen of an island. And one day, an advisor said to her, "Your Majesty, the people on this island are good, but we must beware of all the people on the next island, for they are our enemies." "Our enemies?" responded the queen. "How terrible!" "Yes, it's very terrible," said the advisor, "for our little island will never be safe while we have enemies. We must find a way to get rid of our enemies." "Oh, you are quite right," said the queen. "Do you have any ideas?" "I do indeed," said the advisor. "We can take our army, put it in a ship, sail to the other island, and then our army can march on shore and destroy the enemy." Well, the queen was not sure that this was a good idea. No, well, thank you for sharing your ideas, said the queen, but I need some more time to think about it all. Can you come back tomorrow? "Oh, yes, Your Majesty," said the advisor, and he bowed and left the room. The next day, when the advisor returned to talk to the queen, he was shocked to find her having tea with the queen of the next island. Oh, the advisor turned red with anger. "How can you sit there and drink tea with that person?" he shouted. "She's our enemy. We must get rid of our enemies." Well, the queen looked at her advisor with eyes that were very calm and steady. "You have been a good advisor," she said, "and you were right. We must get rid of our enemies. You would have me destroy my enemies by conquering them with an army. But the best way to get rid of your enemies is to make them your friends." Right? That's what you were going to say, sure. You're right ahead of me there. Well, I want everybody to think about that, because I've thought about that too. You know, as we go through life, there are people that we're kind of afraid of, aren't we? Sometimes some people we meet are pretty bossy, and, you know, we don't like to be around them, and so we shun them. But, you know, maybe we should try this wise queen's way of doing it. And maybe this next week, somebody that you don't like really well, maybe invite them to play with you or something. Or maybe if mom, you know, packs an extra cookie in your lunch, you might say, "Hey, would you like to have a cookie with me?" And you know, it just might work. You just might make a new friend. So good luck with that. And I'm going to try to do it too. Thank you for listening. And I think Miss Sarah is around here. There she is. And she's ready to take you back to your classrooms. Thanks for listening.
Go now in peace, go now in
Well, this is the time in our service where we take time to share some joys and concerns. And so, may I invite you, if you have been experiencing some joy this week, past week, or maybe you have a concern, or maybe you're celebrating a special milestone. If you would like to share it with us, please come forth. I'm going to move the microphone over to the bowl, and oh, I think somebody is coming to help me with that. Please share briefly, or maybe just silently, and put a pebble in the bowl. Again, I think Alex has got this working really well. It's just a little tipsy.
Hi, I'm Denny, and everyone knows I'm never silent.
Let us take a few moments of silence together. It is a powerful thing to breathe in community and to remember how the very breath that we breathe connects us to all living creatures. And then I'll close this with a few words. We are born into the middle of the human story, and we will leave in the middle. We cannot change what came before, and we do not know what comes after. Let us make the most of our middle and help to make the story matter. May we be filled with love this day. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be.
After our song of dedication, our greeters will take up our collection. Generosity is a spiritual practice. Our fellowship is supported entirely by our pledges and donations. We have a tradition that we call Share the Plate. If you're paying your pledge today with a check, please write pledge on the memo line of the check. All undesignated checks and cash will be equally split with a local charity. For the month of October, our Share the Plate recipient is One Hopeful Place in Fort Walton Beach. Their mission is to support those experiencing homelessness and be, as they say, the front door to permanent housing. Your generosity is so appreciated. And now, from you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and by this we live.
Hear these words held sacred by many. First, from the Quran. It may be that God will ordain love between you and those whom you hold as enemies. For God has power over all things, and God is oft forgiving, most merciful. And from the Hindu, Uttarakhanda in the great epic of Ramayana. A superior being does not render evil for evil. One should never harm the wicked or the good or even criminals meriting death. A noble soul will exercise compassion even towards those who enjoy injuring others, or those of cruel deeds, or who is without fault. You have any enemies? It's a question largely relegated to murder mysteries, police dramas, Marvel Comics inspired movies, and these days, politics. We Unitarian Universalists are highly evolved people who take pride in our intellectual ability, our moral compass, and our social status. We don't use this language to describe people with whom we interact. We might talk about being reserved or distant, or perhaps we don't really get along with certain people who can be difficult. But we don't talk about enemies, do we? Do you have enemies? The Buddha is reported to have said, "Silence the angry man with love. Silence the ill-natured man with kindness. Silence the miser with generosity, and the liar with truth." And the ancient Jewish text of Proverbs exhorts people to rejoice not when your enemy falls, and let not your heart be glad when they stumble. And if your enemy is hungry, give them bread to eat, and if they are thirsty, give them water to drink. What if we think in these terms? An enemy is someone who intentionally harms or attempts to harm me or someone I care about. In such context, we might admit that we have had enemies, and we may now have enemies somewhere in our lives. So, do you have enemies? Who are they? Who were they? Paul was a small guy with a big mouth, and he loved to make fun of me. We were 14, and 14-year-olds are often very uncivilized people. We were high school freshmen, and it seemed like Paul was always looking for an opening, always waiting to embarrass me. One day, as history class let out, he pushed past me, and I lost my balance, fell on my face while my books went flying right in front of the whole class. Paul stopped to admire his work and laughed loudly. "Gee, Ruth, you are so fat and clumsy." I heard giggles as I got to my feet and turned to face him. I felt humiliated, and I had reached my boiling point. "Paul, how old are you?" I used to get called fat on the playground by the little kids. What a brilliant insult. How long did you work on that one? "You are so stupid and immature. Grow up, you little jerk." Everyone in the hall laughed, but now they were laughing at him, and his face fell. I had hit the mark, and I had hit without mercy. I picked my books up, and as we all moved toward next classes, I saw Paul slink off alone, head down. And my moment of victorious, indignant rage began to feel less satisfying. I saw that I had hurt him, and that did not feel very good. I did not know then that Paul suffered lots of humiliation for his small stature and for his academic struggles. I did not know that he had a difficult home life or a history of trouble in school. I only knew him as a pest, a bully who wasn't even very good at bullying, and I was sick of being the object of his mockery. He was in detention a lot that year in school, and next year he didn't come back. Rumor was that his parents had been forced to move him to another school. I don't know what happened to him. We never reconciled. He was an enemy of my youth who hurt my feelings and my pride. I did not know how to love such an enemy then, though I had been taught that I should, but not how to do it. This is how most of us met our first enemies, right? We would go to school each fall hoping to meet and make new friends and reunite with old ones. Very few of us were warned that we would meet enemies, but most of us did. Inevitably, most of us encountered other children whom we didn't like or who didn't like us. Sometimes dislike would grow into something worse, more sinister. Without supervision, without capable moral guidance from adults, children can be savage to one another. By the time we reach adulthood, many of us have encountered real enemies. People who don't just dislike us, but who make an actual effort to cause us harm. In college, I remember being the subject of unkind rumor mongering, the butt of a cruel practical joke, the victim of some petty theft. I always took it very hard, these betrayals. I couldn't understand why anyone would treat me so badly. I wanted to be friends with everyone. According to the tradition of Islam, Allah's apostle said, "Beware of suspicion, and do not look for the other's faults, and do not spy on one another, and do not be jealous, and do not hate or desert one another, and be not enemies, but help one another." How were you taught to handle the enemies of your youth? My parents told me to ignore them, and they would get tired of mocking me, which only worked some of the time. I sometimes confronted people, but while it might change practices, I rarely changed my enemies into friends. Sorry, Shar. In counseling, I learned I could not change anyone but myself, and must therefore focus on my own thoughts and feelings, and let go of the desire to change others. There is much wisdom in that, to be sure. In the Christian New Testament, Rabbi Jesus is reported to have said, "But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." There are different kinds of personal enemies. There are strangers we encounter randomly who are just looking out for their own interest, or having a really bad day, or maybe under the influence of some substance, and we just get in their way. A friend once pulled up to a gas pump and got out to discover a woman waiting who thought it was her turn next. And even though the next pump over opened immediately, she let loose a tirade of loud, insulting language, the likes of which he had rarely heard. It was so disturbing that after only pumping a couple of gallons, he got in his car and drove away. Some enemies are best loved from a great, safe distance. There are people whom we see as friends until something happens which brings pressure to bear, and the friend turns on us without warning. There are friends who desert us when circumstances become hard and they are not able or willing to support us during our difficult times. There are work colleagues who seem friendly enough but then turn against us, perhaps even work intentionally to cause us damage out of jealousy or in response to a perceived injury. They use the excuse of competition or trying to get ahead in the workplace as a way to normalize or justify such behavior. The worst personal enemy in my experience is the one who causes harm to someone I love. There is a powerful mama bear in me which comes roaring out in the event of a perceived threat to my children, close family, or friends. The instinct to fight that enemy is so strong then, even though I fancy myself a peaceful, even-tempered person. The Tao Te Ching says, in the words of the sage, "I treat those who are good with goodness, and I also treat those who are not good with goodness. Thus, goodness is attained." Do we have group or tribal enemies? Unitarians and Universalists have been swimming upstream, religiously speaking, through most of our history. Our forebears were the outsiders, the radicals, the upstarts, the heretics. They were the disseminators of ideas deemed dangerous because they threatened the status quo, the current power structures, the norms of society. when the powerful institutions of church and government endeavored to say with absolute authority what people must think and believe, our spiritual ancestors were among the loudest dissenters and challengers. We have a history of being perceived as the enemies of the larger society, the majority tribe, if you will, because we have always encouraged folk to think for themselves and to question authority. Modern opposition to free thought and free faith leaves us confused, doesn't it? And a bit hurt and rather indignant in turns. We have more than enough evidence to make our case for our position on such freedoms and on the practices of equity and justice. Why should we be on the receiving end of so much anger and even hatred? How did we become their enemy? How did we come to feel so often surrounded by enemies? I believe that one of the reasons Unitarian Universalism is such a well-kept secret is because we all come in here a little bruised and a little battered, and we're not eager to be seen very obviously in a culture that treats us sometimes as enemies. The Baha'i faith teaches, let them be kindly fathers to the children of the human race, and compassionate brothers to the youth, and self-denying offspring to those bent with years. The meaning of this is that you must show forth tenderness and love to every human being, even to your enemies, and welcome them all with unalloyed friendship and loving kindness. We are living in a season of great enmity in our nation between opposing political factions. I don't have to tell you all that. At every level, even down to individual households, we are living in suspicion of one another and filled with such rage towards certain public figures over words and deeds which leave us dismayed, incredulous, and terrified. We observe with grief and horror the events of international conflicts, and especially the suffering of the weakest and most vulnerable people caught in the midst of the violence. We feel surrounded by enemies, and living in such a state is taking its toll on our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-beings. We are a faith community set in the midst of several military bases, and we are enriched in our membership by a number of military personnel, active and retired, and by civilian contractors who work on those bases. The question of loving enemies can be particularly challenging in that context. The majority of service persons are not eager to make war on anyone, but they are committed to preparation and training for defense against the enemies of this country. Therein lies the tension, the desire for peace versus the need to be prepared for defense against attack. This is complicated and fraught with more questions than easy answers. How do we follow our call as Unitarian Universalists to work for justice and against institutions and laws which perpetuate injustice, without succumbing to the temptation to see all with opposing viewpoints as our enemies and treating them as such? The great spiritual teacher Zoroaster is reported to have said, "Strive for the good and fight against the evil, but without losing equanimity of the mind and without any malice towards the evildoer." I remember asking a mentor when I was in my 20s, how exactly does one learn to love enemies? He gave me this advice: learn to see where your enemy hurts. Then you will be able to have compassion on them. It takes some work to do this, and even more to live out of it. It is easier to see your opponent, your enemy, as a bad person, as two-dimensional. It is easier to just rage against them and their behavior than to look for their pain. We'd really rather cling to our rage and hatred sometimes, to lash out, like I did to the high school bully, than to stop and try to see their hurt, their fear. Often enemies don't want to let you see such things, and you will probably not be rewarded for such efforts. Hence the phrase, no good deed goes unpunished. But the internal benefit is enormous. Hatred eats away at the mind and spirit and has a damaging effect on the body as well. Nursing grudges and clinging to anger in the end will hurt us far more than our enemies. Letting go of hatred and living out of compassion is much better for us and for the world. Buddhism teaches that hatred does not cease through hatred at any time. Hatred ceases through love. This is an unalterable law. Now, some enemies are best loved from a great distance. I am not encouraging anyone to place or keep themselves in a situation where they may come to harm or submit themselves to exploitation or humiliation. Please seek safety and ask for help if you need it. Call me if you need to. My cell number is on the back of your program. As individuals and as Unitarian Universalists, we are living in a trying season, which feels much like a kind of war. We must find ways to shield ourselves from the message of hatred while we figure out the most effective means of acting as instruments of justice and of peace. How do we accomplish both? Well, we continue to put our energy into the work of justice, and we look courageously at those seeming enemies for their pain and their fear. We try daily to live out of compassion even as we rage for order in the world. It is not an easy path, but we will last longer and accomplish more if we learn to live out of love rather than hatred. I close with the wisdom of the Buddha. Radiate boundless love towards the entire world, above, below, and across, unhindered, without ill will, without enmity. Teach this triple truth to all. A generous heart, kind speech, and a life of service and compassion are the things which renew humanity. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be. You all did such a great job last week singing together. We're going to do another round, a hymn as a round. So if you would take your teal hymnals and turn to 1023. The lovely and talented Erica Erickson is going to help us. Do you want to hold her while you sing? Will it help? We're very flexible here. "1023, Building Bridges." So Erica and I are going to sing it through. Also, she'll play so we can all learn it. And then this half of the room is going to be part one. We'll follow Erica on the organ. And that part is going to be part two. And you just come in when I say so. So it's a round like row, row, row your boat, right? Okay, so we're going to go through it first. Siblings and kindred, nobody said love was easy, but it is absolutely worth the effort. Let us strive to live out of the space of love. Let us go in peace. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be.
Our extinguishing chalice words are written by Stephen Crump. That which is worth doing. That which is worth of doing, create with your hands. That which is worth repeating, speak with a clear voice. That which is worthy of living, go and live it now. And now, please remain seated while we listen to the Post-Lude, and afterwards join us at the back for light refreshments, and then at 11:15, second hour. And don't forget to register to vote if you haven't done so.